Hi, I'm Anthony Carson. I'm a research scientist in the field of artificial intelligence. I'm on my way over to pick up my daughter. I'm making this video blog so that I can try to explain the technology that I've found. I've been developing artificial intelligence for over 25 years. Began doing it back in 1995. I started with the development of an intelligent brain which could actually mimic other people's minds once they're recorded. We use a synthetic brain recorder called a genetograph, which we record people's minds using a multiphasics personality inventory, and we break their brain down into a file delimiter that can be mimicked through a natural language processor. Once we were completed with that, I went over to England and I bought a company called BioVirtual Corporation. They were a three-dimensional meshing software which we were able to do an overlay and create three-dimensional heads in photorealism. Once we brought it back to the United States, we decided that we wanted to create web-based characters and models that could actually exist on the World Wide Web. And once we record your mind and once we stick you on the World Wide Web, you became cybernetically immortal. You could live hundreds of years into the future where your great ancestors could have fully cognitive conversations with the cybernetic self that you had left behind. We had built several models of this, but every time we released a software, Microsoft made changes to their MSDN and would no longer support backward compliancy. This meant that the software could no longer operate and gave me an understanding that the future, no matter what, I could not predict what other software companies were doing with their operating system. Well, I thought, well, the here and now I could make some money. I could go ahead and embed products and put them on websites and use the avatar and intelligence services to allow it to guide people through websites to find products and services. It didn't work out because most of the companies that own websites actually don't own the domain name server. They're usually hired through somebody else who actually owns their domain name server. Now, on the internet, there are a vast number of networks out there that have computers on them called domain name servers. Domain name servers have an IP address. Those IP addresses are handled through one internet service. That one internet service is the network information center for the internet. It tells every single IP conversion for a URL. Well, I wondered, well, what would happen if I created another internet service where there were two internet services? And later on I built 3 and 4 and so on and so forth, but we'll just stick with 1 and 2, okay? Because having a second one is difficult to understand enough. The first one is called the Primary Network Information Center. It allows me to type in www.google.com, and when I hit enter in the browser, it goes out to the internet, says, yep, that's hosted on so-and-so's domain name server, and then that comes back and sends packets back to my browser, which HTML interprets the images and text so that I can see them visually in the browser emulator. Well, what would happen if there were two internets? Imagine the first one does what it's supposed to. That never changes. But the second one, basically, I'm able to ask for services. And by services, I mean, what if I had a widget, and the widget was tied to an SMS gateway, it was hosted through somebody else. Now, I could put this in a second layer and call that layer into play over the first layer. As long as the second layer was transparent, you could see the layer below. And so that primary layer would lay unobstructed, but the widget would show up in the secondary layer, making it appear as if it was in the first layer. And people visually looking at it couldn't tell the difference. This means I could call multiple objects into play over websites without altering the initial primary HTML source in the website. So I went ahead and I built a second internet and built a plugin to the browser called a BHO, or Browser Helper Object, which tells the URL in the combination box up on top where the URL is typed in to look to two NIC services. One where it normally went, the second one where the service was located. And guess what? The object went live. I knew then I could create a registry system and a number 2 internet service. So I could create a whois lookup for the second internet. And then I could type in the URL and then ask, well, whose service is operating on that particular URL location, and when did that service start and when does it end, so on and so forth, the WHOIS statistics. So I built all that, and I got everything up and running, and now I have everything working to where you literally can run hundreds of objects. You had to think about this. There are 2.5 billion web pages on the average of the World Wide Web. Now, out of that 2.5 billion web pages that are out there, every web page becomes a customer, like Craigslist. You may own a location on Craigslist where you're actually advertising a motorcycle or a car for sale, and you might want to add services to that site. Well, Craigslist won't allow you to, but with the Network Information Center 2, it would allow you to be able to add services to that site. This is the end of video blog 2.